The old pickup truck coughed and wheezed as it made its way down the winding mountain road. Behind the wheel sat a man who looked much older than his 52 years. His name was William, but nobody had called him by his real name in so long that he'd almost forgotten what it sounded like. His thick beard was streaked with gray and hadn't seen a proper trim in months. Deep lines carved paths across his weathered face, telling stories of too many sleepless nights and too much pain. His clothes hung loose on his frame, flannel shirts that had once fit properly now draped over shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the world. 5 years ago, William had been a different man entirely. Back then, he'd been known as Bill to his friends at the lumber mill. He'd wake up every morning to the smell of coffee brewing and the sound of his wife humming in the kitchen. His little girl would run to him with pigtails bouncing, wrapping her tiny arms around his legs before he left for work. Those days felt like a lifetime ago now. Sometimes, when the mountain wind was just right, he could almost hear their laughter echoing through the trees. But then reality would crash back down, and he'd remember that they were gone, both of them. In one terrible night that changed everything. The accident had happened on a Tuesday evening in October. His wife had taken their daughter to a school play, something about autumn leaves and harvest time. William was supposed to drive them, but the mill had called with an emergency, a broken conveyor belt that needed fixing before the morning shift. He'd kissed them goodbye, promising to meet them at the school if he finished early enough. He never made it to that play. The call came at 9:30. A drunk driver had run a red light downtown. The impact had been instant. The officer on the phone spoke in gentle tones, using words like immediate and no suffering, but William heard none of it. The phone had slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor as his world collapsed around him. Now, 5 years later, William lived alone in a small cabin he'd built with his own hands high up in the mountains. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by tall pine trees miles away from the nearest neighbor. It was just one room with a sleeping loft, a wood-burning stove, and a small kitchen that he rarely used for anything more than heating up canned soup. The townspeople below thought he was crazy. He'd heard them whispering when he made his monthly trips down for supplies. Mountain Man, they called him. Some said he talked to himself up there in the woods. Others claimed he'd lost his mind completely after the tragedy. They weren't entirely wrong. William did talk to himself sometimes. Long conversations with the memory of his wife about what to plant in the small garden behind the cabin. Quiet words to his daughter about the dear family that visited every evening to drink from the stream nearby. It was easier than accepting. The silence. The pickup truck hit a pothole, jolting William back to the present. He was heading into Cedar Falls, the small town where he'd once lived and worked. These trips were torture, but necessary. He needed coffee, rice, batteries for his flashlight, and a few other basic supplies. He'd learned to make the journey as quick as possible, get in, buy what he needed, and get out before too many people noticed him. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as the first buildings came into view. Cedar Falls hadn't changed much in 5 years. The same old gas station sat on the corner, its paint peeling just a little bit more. The same faded signs advertised the same local businesses. Even the potholes in Main Street seemed to be in exactly the same spots. William parked his truck outside Morrison's general store and sat for a moment, gathering his courage. Through the windshield, he could see Mrs. Morrison arranging canned goods on a shelf. She'd been kind to him after the accident, bringing casseroles to his house and calling to check on him. But William had pushed everyone away back then, too. Lost in his grief to accept help from anyone, the bell above the door chimed as he entered the store. Mrs. Morrison looked up and offered a gentle smile. She never asked how he was doing anymore, had learned that he preferred to shop in silence. She'd simply nod hello and let him gather what he needed without conversation. William moved through the narrow aisles like a ghost. Coffee, rice, batteries, a can of soup for tonight's dinner. His list was always the same, his needs simple and few. He'd become a man who lived day by day, never planning more than a week ahead, because planning for the future required hope. And hope was something he'd buried along with his family. As he placed his items on the counter, Mrs. Morrison rang them up quietly. She'd aged in the past 5 years too. her hair now completely silver, her movements a little slower. William wondered if she ever thought about how different things might have been if he'd just said no to the mill that night, if he'd insisted on driving his family to the school play like he'd promised. "That'll be $43.60, Mrs. Morrison said softly. William handed her 2 20s and a 5, waiting for his change. Through the store window, he could see people walking by on the sidewalk. Families heading to the diner for lunch, children skipping alongside their parents. Normal people living normal lives, the kind of life he'd once taken for granted. "You take care of yourself up there, Bill," Mrs. Morrison said as she handed him his change. Using his old nickname for the first time in years, William nodded and picked up his bag. "Thanks, Mary," he managed to say, his voice rusty from lack of use. The drive back up the mountain usually brought him relief, but today something felt different. There was a restlessness in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the way Mrs. Morrison had looked at him with something that might have been concern. Or maybe it was the family he'd seen through the window, the little girl who'd reminded him of his own daughter. Whatever it was, William felt more unsettled than usual as his truck climbed the winding road back to his cabin. The trees seemed to press in closer today, the shadows deeper and more threatening. Even the familiar sight of his small home in the clearing didn't bring its usual sense of peace. That night, as he sat on his porch listening to the sounds of the forest, William found himself thinking about the future for the first time in years. Not planning exactly, but wondering if this was how he'd spend the rest of his days, alone on a mountain, slowly fading away like morning mist. He didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would bring a trip to town that would change everything. Tomorrow, he would make a decision that would seem crazy to everyone who knew him, including himself. Tomorrow, he would discover that sometimes the very thing you think you can't handle is exactly what you need to start living again. But tonight, William just sat in his chair and listened to the wind in the trees, unaware that his life was about to take a turn he never could have imagined. The next morning started like any other for William. He woke up before dawn, made his coffee black and strong, and sat on his porch watching the sun creep over the mountain peaks. But something was different today. That restless feeling from yesterday hadn't gone away. If anything, it had gotten stronger. By 9 o'clock, he found himself loading up his truck again. He told himself he needed more supplies, but deep down he knew that wasn't true. Something was pulling him back to town, though he couldn't say what. The drive down the mountain felt longer today. William's hands drummed nervously on the steering wheel as he navigated the winding road. When was the last time he'd made 2 trips to town in as many days? He couldn't remember. His routine had been the same for years, 1 trip per month. Get what he needed and disappear back into the mountains. As his truck rolled into Cedar Falls, William noticed something unusual. There were more cars parked along Main Street than normal. People were walking in the same direction, toward the old courthouse at the end of the block. Some carried folding chairs, others had coolers and blankets. It looked like some kind of community event was happening. William parked his truck and sat for a moment, watching the small crowd gather. Curiosity was not an emotion he'd felt in a long time. For 5 years, he'd trained himself not to care about what happened in the world below his mountain. But today, something made him want to know what was drawing all these people together. He climbed out of his truck and followed the crowd at a distance. The autumn air was crisp, and leaves crunched under his boots as he walked. Some people nodded at him politely, though he could see the questions in their eyes. What was the mountain hermit doing here? The courthouse steps were packed with people, sitting on blankets and folding chairs. At the front, a man in a suit stood behind a small podium with a microphone. Tables were set up nearby, covered with boxes and household items. William realized what this was, an estate auction. He'd been to a few of these years ago, back when he and his wife were furnishing their first home. Estate auctions were where families sold off the belongings of people who had passed away. Sometimes you could find real treasures, antique furniture, vintage tools, or family heirlooms that someone no longer wanted. William found a spot at the back of the crowd and leaned against a tree. He wasn't planning to bid on anything, but the voices and activity felt strangely comforting after days of silence on the mountain. The auctioneer was a heavy-set man with a booming voice who seemed to know half the people in the crowd by name. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the estate. Auction for the late Dorothy Henderson," the auctioneer announced. Dorothy was a pillar of this community for 87 years, and her family has asked us to find good homes for her belongings. William listened as the bidding began. First came the furniture, a dining room set that went to a young couple, an antique rocking chair that an elderly woman bought for her granddaughter. Then came boxes of dishes, old books, and garden tools. The prices were reasonable, and people seemed genuinely happy to take home pieces of Dorothy's life. As the auction continued, William found himself getting caught up in the energy of it all. There was something heartwarming about watching these items find new homes, seeing people bid on things they truly wanted rather than just needed. It reminded him of a time when he cared about more than just surviving day to day. About halfway through the auction, something changed. The auctioneer's voice became more serious and the crowd grew quieter. "Now, folks, we come to a more unusual situation," he said, shuffling through his papers. "As some of you know, Dorothy's great-niece has been living with her for the past 6 years. The child's name is Lucy, and she's 8 years old." William straightened up, suddenly more alert. Where was this going? "Dorothy was Lucy's legal guardian," the auctioneer continued. "The child has no other family that we can locate. Now, I know this is unusual, but under the old laws of this county, guardianship can be transferred through public auction if no." Family members come forward. A murmur went through the crowd. Some people looked uncomfortable, others whispered to their neighbors. William had never heard of such a thing, but apparently it was legal in their rural county, a leftover from the old days that nobody had bothered to change. "Before we proceed," the auctioneer said, "let me bring Lucy forward so you can meet her." From behind one of the tables, a small figure emerged. She was tiny for 8 years old, with straight brown hair that hung to her shoulders and dark eyes. That seemed too serious for her age. She wore a simple blue dress that was a little too big for her, and she clutched a worn teddy bear against her chest, the child. Lucy walked slowly to the front and stood beside the auctioneer. She didn't look scared exactly, but she didn't look happy either. Her face was blank, like she was trying not to feel anything at all. William recognized that look. He'd seen it in his own mirror for the past 5 years. "Lucy is a good child," the auctioneer said gently. "She's quiet and well-behaved. She's been through a lot, losing her great-aunt so recently. She needs a family who can give her stability and love." William watched as people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered to each other, but nobody raised their hand to bid. Minutes passed. The silence stretched on until it became painful. "Come now, folks," the auctioneer tried again. "This little girl needs a home. The county will provide some financial assistance for her care. Surely someone here has room in their heart and home for Lucy." Still nothing. William could see the uncertainty on people's faces. Taking in a child was a huge responsibility, especially one who had been through trauma. Most of the families here already had their hands full with their own children. Lucy stood perfectly still through all of this, her face showing no emotion. But William noticed her grip tighten on the teddy bear. His heart began to pound as he watched this small, brave girl trying not to show how scared she must be. "I'll start the bidding at $50, the auctioneer said, his voice less confident now. Silence. $25? He tried. Still nothing. William felt something stirring in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. It was like a voice calling to him from somewhere deep inside, telling him to act. His feet seemed to move on their own, carrying him forward through the crowd. $200, he heard himself say. Every head in the crowd turned toward him. The auctioneer looked surprised but pleased. "We have a bid of $200 from the gentleman in the back." "Do I hear $250? The crowd remained silent. People stared at William like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. What did a broken hermit know about raising a child? He lived alone on a mountain with no electricity and barely enough room for himself. Going once for $200, the auctioneer called. Going twice. William's heart hammered against his ribs. What was he doing? This was crazy. He wasn't qualified to take care of anyone, let alone a traumatized child. Sold, the auctioneer announced. The guardianship of Lucy Henderson goes to ... The auctioneer paused, realizing he didn't know William's name. William, he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. William, the auctioneer repeated with a smile. Congratulations, sir. Please come forward to complete the paperwork. As William walked through the crowd on shaking legs, he caught sight of Lucy's face. She was looking at him with those serious dark eyes, studying him like she was trying to figure out what kind of person would bid on a child at an auction. He had no idea what he was going to do now. He had no plan, no experience with children, and no idea how to take care of anyone other than himself. All he knew was that something had compelled him to speak up when everyone else stayed silent. Lucy needed someone. And for reasons he couldn't explain, William had decided that someone was going to be him. The paperwork took forever. William sat in the courthouse office, his hands shaking as he signed document after document. The social worker, a kind woman named Mrs. Peterson, explained everything twice to make sure he understood what he was agreeing to: legal guardianship, responsibility for Lucy's education, health care, and general welfare, background checks that would need to be completed within 30 days. Through it all, Lucy sat silently in a chair beside him, still clutching her teddy bear. She hadn't said a single word since the auction ended, not even her name when Mrs. Peterson had asked her to introduce herself. The social worker explained that Lucy had been very quiet since her great-aunt Dorothy passed away 2 weeks ago. She's been through a lot, Mrs. Peterson said quietly while Lucy was distracted by a children's book. Dorothy was the only family she'd known since she was 2 years old. Before that, well, her situation was difficult. She's a resilient child, but she's learned to protect herself by not getting too attached to people. William nodded, though he wasn't sure he understood what that meant. How could a child not get attached to people? Wasn't that what children did naturally? Do you have experience with children, Mr. William? Mrs. Peterson asked, for a moment. William's throat felt too tight to speak. I had a daughter once, he managed to say. She was 6 when she ... He couldn't finish the sentence. Mrs. Peterson's expression softened with understanding. I see. Well, Lucy will need patience and consistency. She's been through several changes recently, and this will be another big adjustment for her. When all the paperwork was finally complete, Mrs. Peterson walked them out to William's truck. Lucy carried a small backpack that apparently contained all her belongings in the world. The sight of it made William's chest ache. How could one little girl own so little? Lucy, this is William, Mrs. Peterson said gently, kneeling down to the child's level. He's going to take care of you now. If you need anything or if you're scared, you can always call me, okay? Lucy nodded but still didn't speak. Her eyes moved from Mrs. Peterson to William, studying his face like she was trying to memorize it. William wondered what she saw when she looked at him, a stranger with wild hair and old clothes, who had bought her like a piece of furniture at an auction. The drive up the mountain was the longest hour of William's life. Lucy sat as far away from him as possible in the truck's cab, pressed against the passenger door with her backpack on her lap and her teddy bear in her arms. She stared out the window as they climbed higher and higher into the hills, watching the houses grow farther apart until there were no houses at all. William tried to think of something to say. In his old life, he'd been good with children. His own daughter had chattered constantly during car rides, telling him about her day at school or asking questions about everything they passed. But this little girl was different. She seemed wrapped in silence like a protective shell. It's pretty up here, he finally said, gesturing toward the view outside. Lots of trees and wildlife. I've seen deer, raccoons, even a bear once. Lucy turned to look at him for a moment, then went back to staring out the window. William wasn't sure if she was interested or scared by the mention of bears. The bear was far away, he added quickly. They usually stay away from people, nothing to worry about. Still no response. William gave up trying to make conversation and focused on driving. The mountain road was narrow and winding, and his old truck didn't handle as well as it used to. The last thing he needed was to have an accident on Lucy's first day with him. When they finally reached his cabin, William parked the truck and sat for a moment, seeing his home through Lucy's eyes. The small wooden building looked even smaller than usual. The windows needed cleaning, and weeds had grown up around the foundation. It wasn't much, but it was all he had to offer. "This is it," he said, "home." Lucy climbed out of the truck slowly, looking around at the clearing surrounded by tall pine trees. William watched her take in the vegetable garden behind the cabin, the small shed where he kept his tools, and the outhouse that served as the only bathroom. She didn't look impressed, but she didn't look scared either. Mostly she just looked tired. Inside the cabin, William realized how unprepared he was for this moment. The single room contained his bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a wood-burning stove, and some basic kitchen supplies. There was a ladder leading up to a small loft where he stored his winter clothes and extra blankets. "You can have the bed," he said, gesturing toward his narrow cot in the corner. "I'll sleep on the floor, or maybe I can set something up in the loft." Lucy set her backpack down and looked around the cabin. William tried to see it through her eyes, a grown man's space with no decorations, no color, no comfort. It must have seemed like a prison compared to whatever home she'd shared with her great-aunt Dorothy. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I've got some soup or crackers. I'm not much of a cook, but I can make simple things." She shook her head slightly, the first real response she'd given him all day. "Okay, well, if you get hungry later, just let me know." William busied himself making coffee, partly because he needed the caffeine, but mostly because he didn't know what else to do. Having another person in his space felt strange after so many years alone. Every movement he made seemed too loud. Every word he spoke seemed to echo in the small room. Lucy explored the cabin quietly, running her fingers along the wooden walls and examining his few possessions. She stopped at a shelf where he kept his wood-carving tools and a few finished pieces, a small deer, a bird with outstretched wings, a bear cub sitting upright. For the first time since the auction, she showed real interest in something. She reached toward the wooden deer, then pulled her hand back like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to touch it. "You can look at it," William said. "I made all of those. It's a hobby of mine." Lucy picked up the deer carefully, turning it over in her small hands. The wood was smooth and warm, carved with careful attention to detail. William had spent many evenings working on it, finding peace in the repetitive motion of the carving knife. As evening approached, William realized he had no idea what children ate or when they went to bed. He heated up a can of vegetable soup and offered it to Lucy, along with some crackers and a glass of water. She ate a little, but not much. "There's a stream about 50 yards behind the cabin," he told her. "The water's clean and cold. I get all my drinking water from there, and there's an outhouse out back when you need it." Lucy nodded, still not speaking. When it got dark, William lit a kerosene lamp and tried to make the bed comfortable for Lucy. He found extra blankets in the loft and arranged them as best he could. She watched him work, then climbed into the bed fully dressed, still holding her teddy bear. "Good night," William said softly, settling himself on the floor with a pillow and an old sleeping bag. From the bed came the smallest whisper, "Good night." It was the first thing she'd said to him directly, and it hit William harder than he expected. This little girl was so far from everything familiar, sleeping in a stranger's bed in a cabin on a mountain, and she still had the manners to say good night. As the night wore on, William lay awake listening to Lucy's breathing. Sometimes it was steady and peaceful, but other times he could hear her crying quietly into her pillow. Each soft sob felt like a knife in his chest. He wanted to comfort her, but he didn't know how. What words could possibly help a child who had lost everything? Eventually, exhaustion won over anxiety, and William fell into a restless sleep. But even in his dreams, he could hear crying, sometimes Lucy's, sometimes his own daughter's from long ago, sometimes his own from all the nights he'd wept alone on this mountain. When morning came, William would wake up wondering what he'd gotten himself into. But for now, in the quiet darkness of the cabin, Two broken souls tried to find rest under the same roof for the first time. The first week was harder than William had imagined. He'd gotten used to living by his own schedule, eating when he felt like it, sleeping when he was tired, and spending entire days without saying a word out loud. Now he had to think about someone else's needs, and he wasn't sure he remembered how Lucy remained mostly silent, but she was always watching. William would catch her studying him as he made his morning coffee or sharpened his carving tools. Her dark eyes followed his every movement like she was trying to figure out what kind of person he really was on the third day. William realized he needed to establish some kind of routine. Children needed structure, he remembered that much from his old life. So he started waking up at the same time every morning, making breakfast at 7, and setting regular meal times throughout the day. "We should probably figure out some rules," he said one morning as they sat at his small table eating oatmeal. "Nothing strict, just so we both know what to expect." Lucy looked up from her bowl but didn't say anything. "Like, I get up early because—" "I'm used to it," William continued. "But you can sleep as long as you want. There's no school right now since it's almost winter break, so we have time to get you settled in." He paused, realizing he'd have to deal with the school situation soon. How was he supposed to enroll her? He'd have to go back to town, fill out more paperwork, explain to people why a hermit was suddenly raising a child. "And I do most of my work outside during the day," he added. "Chopping wood, maintaining the cabin, checking the garden." "You can help if you want to, or you can stay inside where it's warm." Lucy nodded slightly, the first sign of understanding she'd shown. That afternoon, William was splitting logs behind the cabin when he noticed Lucy watching him from the doorway. She'd been inside most of the day, either sitting by the window or looking through the few books he had on his shelves. "Want to learn how to do this?" he called to her. She stepped outside, wrapping her arms around herself in the cold air. William realized she only had the thin jacket she'd worn to the auction. He'd have to get her warmer clothes soon, another item on his growing list of things he didn't know how to handle. "It's all about the angle," William said, setting up a smaller log on the chopping block. "You don't try to power through the wood, you let the axe do the work." He demonstrated with a careful swing, splitting the log cleanly in half. Lucy watched intently, studying the way he held the axe and positioned his feet. "Want to try?" he asked, offering her a much smaller hatchet he used for kindling. Lucy took the tool carefully. Testing its weight in her small hands, William showed her how to hold it safely and helped her position a thin piece of wood on the block. Her first swing missed completely. The second one hit the wood but didn't split it. On the third try, the wood cracked apart and William saw the smallest hint of a smile cross Lucy's face. "Good job," he said. "You're a natural." Over the next few days, Lucy began venturing outside more often. She'd watch William work in the garden, pulling up the last of the winter vegetables and preparing the beds for spring. She helped him carry water from the stream and gather kindling for the fire. William started teaching her about the mountain without really thinking about it. He showed her which plants were safe to touch and which ones to avoid. He pointed out animal tracks in the mud near the stream and explained how to tell the difference between deer prints and raccoon prints. "The raccoons come out at night mostly," he said as they knelt beside some tiny handprints in the soft earth. "They're curious little things. Sometimes I hear them on the roof, probably trying to figure out what I am." Lucy smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Have you seen any bears?" she asked suddenly. William was so surprised to hear her speak that it took him a moment to answer. "A few times, but always from far away. They're more scared of us than we are of them. Make noise when you're walking in the woods and they'll stay away." "What if one comes to the cabin?" "Then we go inside and wait for it to leave," William said. "Bears aren't interested in bothering people. They just want to find food and be left alone." Lucy nodded thoughtfully. "Like you," she said. William looked at her sharply. The comment caught him off guard with its simple honesty. "I guess so," he said after a moment. "Though I'm not looking for food, I already found that." As the days passed, William began to notice small changes in both of them. Lucy started helping with chores without being asked. She'd set the table for meals, feed the small fire in the stove when it got low, and organize his carving tools when he left them scattered around. She seemed to anticipate what he needed before he asked for it. When he was working outside and his coffee cup was empty, she'd bring him a fresh one. When he was carving in the evening, she'd hand him different tools before he reached for them. William found himself looking forward to these small interactions. For the first time in years, he had someone to share the little moments of his day with. Even if they didn't talk much, there was comfort in not being completely alone. One evening, as William sat by the fire working on a new carving, Lucy appeared beside his chair with her teddy bear. "What are you making?" she asked quietly. "I'm not sure yet," William admitted, holding up the rough piece of wood. "Sometimes I start carving and let the wood tell me what it wants to be." Lucy settled on the floor beside his chair, watching as he worked. The repetitive scraping of the knife against wood seemed to calm her. Her breathing became slower and deeper as she relaxed. "My great-aunt Dorothy used to knit," Lucy said after a while. "She said it helped her think." "What kinds of things did she make?" "Blankets, mostly. And hats. She made me this hat." Lucy pulled a small knitted cap from her backpack, purple with little flowers around the edge. "It's beautiful," William said, and he meant it. The stitches were small and even, made with obvious care and love. "She taught me a little bit," Lucy continued, "but I wasn't very good at it. My fingers are too small for the needles." "Maybe you'd be good at carving," William suggested. "Your hands are the right size for detail work." Lucy looked up at him with interest. "Could you teach me?" "If you want to learn," William said. "We'd start with something simple, maybe a small animal or a flower." "I'd like that," Lucy said softly, that night as William prepared for bed on his makeshift pallet on the floor. He realized something had shifted between them. They were starting to feel less like strangers and more like two people who happened to share the same space. Lucy was still quiet most of the time, and William was still awkward around her, but they were learning each other's rhythms. She knew he liked his coffee black and strong in the morning. He knew she always arranged her teddy bear carefully on the pillow before going to sleep. They were both still carrying their pain. William could see it in the way Lucy sometimes stared off into the distance, and he knew she could probably see it in him too. But somehow, sharing the same small space was making the pain a little more bearable for both of them. As he lay in the dark listening to Lucy's steady breathing, William realized he'd stopped thinking about each day as just something to survive. He was starting to think about tomorrow, about what they might do together, about what new small thing he might learn about this quiet, observant little girl who had somehow become part of his life. For the first time in 5 years, William fell asleep planning for the future instead of just trying to forget the past. 3 weeks had passed since the auction, and William was starting to believe they might actually make this work. Lucy had begun talking more, asking questions about the animals they saw and helping with daily tasks around the cabin. She'd even started learning to carve, though her first attempts resulted in more wood shavings than actual shapes. The November evenings were getting colder, and William had taken to building larger fires in the wood stove. After dinner, they'd sit together in the warm glow of the flames. William would work on his carvings while Lucy practiced with small pieces of soft pine wood, trying to make the simple cuts he'd taught her. On this particular evening, William was putting the finishing touches on a small wooden owl. He'd been working on it for over a week, carefully shaping each feather and giving the bird's eyes a wise, gentle expression. The firelight danced across the smooth wood, bringing the little creature almost to life. Lucy sat cross-legged on the floor beside his chair, as had become her habit. She'd given up trying to carve for the night and was just holding her teddy bear, watching William work. The bear was looking more worn than ever, with patches where the fur had rubbed thin and one eye that was barely hanging on by a thread. "That bear's been with you a long time," William observed, not looking up from his carving. "Since I was little," Lucy said softly, "before I came to live with Great-Aunt Dorothy." William had learned not to push too hard when Lucy mentioned her past. She shared small pieces of information when she was ready, but never the whole story at once. He'd figured out that her life before Dorothy had been difficult, but he didn't know the details. "What's his name?" William asked, making a delicate cut around the owl's beak. "I don't know," Lucy said, which surprised him. "You don't know your bear's name?" Lucy shook her head. "I used to know, but I was so little when I got him. Great Aunt Dorothy always just called him Bear." William set down his carving knife and looked at the stuffed animal more closely. It was clearly handmade, not store-bought. The fabric was a soft brown cotton, and someone had taken great care with the stitching. One of the ears was slightly crooked, which somehow made it more endearing. "May I see him?" William asked gently. Lucy hesitated for a moment, then handed over the bear. William could tell it was hard for her to let go of it, even for a few seconds. The bear was clearly her most precious possession, her connection to whatever family she'd had before. As William examined the toy, he noticed something unusual. One of the buttons that served as the bear's vest had carved edges, like it was made of wood instead of plastic. He looked closer and saw tiny marks etched into the surface. "Lucy," he said carefully, "look at this button." She leaned closer as William held the bear up to the firelight. The button was definitely carved wood, smooth and polished from years of handling. And there, barely visible in the dancing light, were two small letters carved into the surface. W.M. William's hands began to shake. W.M. Those were his initials, William McKenna. But that was impossible. He'd never made a teddy bear, never carved buttons for children's toys. His work was simple: birds, deer, small forest animals that he sold occasionally at the general store. "Where did you get this bear, Lucy?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't remember exactly," she said, looking puzzled by his reaction. "I think I've always had him. Great Aunt Dorothy said my mama gave him to me when I was really small." William's mind was racing. He tried to remember if he'd ever made wooden buttons, ever given a carved piece to someone who might have used it on a child's toy. But the letters were so clear, so deliberately carved. This wasn't an accident or coincidence. "Tell me about your mama," William said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What do you remember about her?" Lucy took the bear back and held it close. "Not much. Great Aunt Dorothy said she was young when I was born. She said Mama had to give me to her because she couldn't take care of me properly." "Do you know your mama's name?" "Jennifer," Lucy said. "Jennifer McKenna, but Great Aunt Dorothy said she changed it later. She said Mama wanted to start over fresh." The carving knife slipped from William's fingers and clattered to the floor. McKenna, that was his last name, the name he'd stopped using when he moved to the mountain. The name that was on his birth certificate and driver's license, but that no one in Cedar Falls had ever known. "Lucy," he said, his voice shaking now, "do you know anything else about your mama? Anything at all?" She frowned, trying to remember. "Great Aunt Dorothy used to tell me stories sometimes. She said Mama was pretty, with dark hair like mine. And, she said Mama told her that my daddy was a good man who worked with wood." William felt like the world was spinning around him. Jennifer McKenna, a young woman with dark hair who had given birth to a child and then given that child away. A woman who had told someone that the father worked with wood. His daughter's name had been Jennifer. The daughter who had died in the car accident 5 years ago had been named Jennifer. But she'd only been 6 years old when she died. She couldn't have had a child, could she? William's mind struggled to make sense of what he was hearing. Lucy was 8 years old now. If Jennifer had given birth to her when she was very young, but that would mean his daughter had been barely 14 when Lucy was born. That would mean his Jennifer had lived longer than he thought. That would mean... "Lucy," he said, his voice barely audible, "how old was your mama when you were born?" "I don't know for sure," Lucy said. But Great Aunt Dorothy said she was just a teenager. She said it was hard for Mama because she was so young and scared. William closed his eyes, trying to process this information. Could his daughter have survived the accident somehow? Could she have lived long enough to have a child? But that was impossible. He'd identified her body at the hospital. He'd buried her beside her mother unless... "Lucy, what was your mama's full name? Do you know?" "Jennifer McKenna Thompson," Lucy said. Great-Aunt Dorothy said she took a new last name when she moved away. Thompson, not his daughter then, but still a McKenna. Still someone who knew about his woodworking. Still someone who had given her child a teddy bear with his initials carved into a button. William stood up abruptly and began pacing the small cabin. His mind was churning with possibilities, each one more impossible than the last. Who was Jennifer McKenna Thompson? How did she know his name? Why would she carve his initials into her child's toy? Are you okay? Lucy asked, clutching her bear tighter. William looked at this little girl who had somehow ended up in his care. This child who carried a piece of his work with her everywhere she went. Her dark hair, her serious eyes, something about the shape of her face that seemed familiar. Lucy, he said, kneeling down in front of her, I think I might have known your mama. Lucy's eyes went wide. Really? I think so. I think she might have been related to me somehow. These initials on your bear. They're mine. W. McKenna. Lucy stared at him in amazement. You made this button? I think I did. I just can't remember when or why. Lucy looked down at her bear, then back up at William. Does that mean we're family? William felt tears building in his eyes. I think it might, sweetheart. I think it might. As Lucy threw her arms around his neck, still clutching her teddy bear between them, William realized that the connection he'd felt to this child from the very first moment hadn't been imagination. Somehow, in ways he didn't yet understand, Lucy had been meant to find him. The auction, his inexplicable decision to bid, the way she'd looked at him with those serious dark eyes, it had all been leading to this moment. They were family. He didn't know how yet, but they were family. And for the first time since the accident, William felt like he'd come home. That night, William couldn't sleep. He lay on his makeshift bed on the floor, staring at the ceiling and trying to piece together the puzzle. Lucy had fallen asleep hours ago, but she was restless, tossing and turning like she was having bad dreams. The carved button with his initials kept running through his mind. When had he made it? He'd been carving for over 20 years, starting as a hobby when his daughter was small. Back then, he'd made all sorts of little things, toys, decorations, gifts for neighbors. But wooden buttons? That seemed like such an odd thing to carve. As the hours dragged by, William found himself thinking about his life before the accident. He and his wife had lived in a small house on the edge of Cedar Falls. Their daughter, Jennifer, had been the light of their lives, a bright, cheerful girl who loved school and had dozens of friends. She'd been only 6 when the drunk driver took her and her mother away from him. But what if there had been more to Jennifer's story? What if there were things about his daughter's life that he'd never known? When morning finally came, William was already awake, sitting by the dying fire and drinking coffee. Lucy woke up slowly, rubbing her eyes and climbing down from the bed with her teddy bear in her arms. Good morning, she said softly, the way she always did. Morning, sweetheart, William replied. The word sweetheart had started coming naturally to him over the past few weeks, and Lucy never seemed to mind it. As they ate breakfast together, William found himself studying Lucy's face more carefully than ever before. Her dark hair was the same color his own had been when he was younger. Her green eyes were similar to his wife's. And there was something about the shape of her nose that reminded him of someone, though he couldn't place who. Lucy, he said carefully, tell me more about what Great-Aunt Dorothy told you about your mama. Lucy looked up from her oatmeal. She didn't talk about her very much. I think it made her sad. What did she say when she did talk about her? Lucy thought for a moment. She said Mama was very young when I was born. Only 15, I think. She said Mama couldn't take care of a baby because she was still just a kid herself. 15. William's mind raced. If Lucy was 8 now, and Jennifer had been 15 when Lucy was born, that would make Jennifer 23 today. His daughter would have been 23 now, too, if she'd lived. Did Dorothy ever say where your mama lived? What town she was from? Somewhere not too far from here, Lucy said. She said Mama would visit sometimes when I was really little, but then she stopped coming. William felt his heart pounding. When did she stop coming? Great-Aunt Dorothy said it was about 5 years ago. She said something bad happened to Mama and she couldn't visit anymore. 5 years ago. the same time as the accident that had taken William's family. "Lucy," William said, his voice shaking slightly, "did Dorothy ever tell you your mama's middle name?" Lucy shook her head. "I don't think so. Why?" William stood up and walked to the small wooden box where he kept his important papers. Inside were his driver's license, the deed to his cabin, and a few old photographs he'd never been able to throw away. He pulled out one particular photo, a picture of his daughter Jennifer taken just a few months before the accident. "Lucy, come here for a minute." She walked over to where he stood by the window, where the morning light was brightest. William held up the photograph. "Do you recognize this person?" Lucy stared at the photo for a long moment. It showed a young girl with dark hair and green eyes, smiling at the camera. She was missing her two front teeth, and she wore a pink dress with small flowers on it. "She looks like me," Lucy said quietly. "This was my daughter," William said. "Her name was Jennifer." Lucy's eyes went wide. "Your daughter? She died in a car accident 5 years ago." "At least I thought she did." William's hands were shaking as he held the photo. Could it be possible? Could his 6-year-old daughter have somehow survived the accident? Could she have lived to grow up, to have a child of her own? "But she's just a little girl in this picture," Lucy said, confused. "This picture was taken when she was 6, William explained. "Right before the accident." "But Lucy, what if she didn't die that night? What if she survived somehow?" Even as he said it, William knew it sounded impossible. He'd been to the hospital. He'd seen the bodies. He'd buried his wife and daughter in the cemetery outside town. But the evidence was right in front of him, this little girl who looked so much like his family, who carried his initials carved into her most precious possession. "Tell me everything you remember about your mama," William said urgently. "Everything Dorothy ever told you about her." Lucy sat down on the floor, hugging her teddy bear tightly. "Dorothy said Mama was scared when I was born. She said Mama couldn't remember things very well because of an accident she'd been in." William's heart stopped. "An accident?" "Dorothy said Mama had been hurt really bad when she was little. Something happened to her head, and it made her forget things. She said that's why Mama sometimes seemed like a child even though she was grown up. Brain injury, memory loss." William's mind raced with possibilities. What if Jennifer had survived the accident but been so badly hurt that everyone thought she was dead? What if she'd lost her memory and been taken somewhere else, raised by someone else? "Did Dorothy ever say anything about the accident that hurt your mama?" Lucy nodded slowly. "She said it was a car crash. She said Mama's family all died in it and Mama was the only one who lived. But she was hurt so bad that she couldn't remember who she was for a long time." William felt like he couldn't breathe. A car crash that killed the rest of the family. Memory loss. A young woman who seemed childlike despite being grown up. It was all fitting together in a way that seemed impossible but somehow made perfect sense. "Lucy," he said, kneeling down in front of her, "I think your mama was my daughter Jennifer." Lucy stared at him with wide eyes. "But how is that possible?" "I don't know yet," William admitted. "But I think somehow Jennifer survived that accident. I think she was hurt so badly that no one knew who she was and someone else took care of her. She grew up not remembering her real family, not remembering me. So that would make you your grandfather," William finished. "If I'm right, you're my granddaughter." Lucy looked down at her teddy bear, then back up at William. "Is that why? You felt like you had to help me at the auction?" William thought about that moment when he'd raised his hand to bid. The compulsion he'd felt, the way something deep inside him had insisted he speak up when everyone else stayed silent. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe some part of me recognized you even though I didn't understand it at the time." Lucy was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. Then she looked up at William with tears in her eyes. "Does this mean I'm not alone anymore?" William felt his own tears starting to fall. "You were never alone, sweetheart. I just didn't know you existed." As Lucy threw herself into his arms, William realized that the family he'd thought he'd lost forever had somehow found its way back to him. Not in the way he'd expected, not in a way that made sense, but in the only way that mattered. They were together now. And this time he was never going to let go. The days following their discovery felt like stepping into a completely different world. William would wake up each morning and for a split second forget what had changed. Then remember that the little girl sleeping in his bed wasn't just a child he was caring for. She was his granddaughter, his family. His blood. Lucy seemed to be adjusting to the truth better than William was. Children, he realized, were more flexible with big changes than adults. She'd started calling him Grandpa William, and the sound of it made his heart skip every single time. "Grandpa William," she said one morning as they sat eating breakfast, "can you tell me more about my mama when she was little?" William had been both dreading and hoping for this question. He'd spent the last few nights going through the small box of photographs he'd kept hidden away for 5 years, the ones that were too painful to look at but too precious to throw away. "She was a lot like you," William said, pulling out a photo and setting it on the table between them. "Smart, curious about everything. She loved animals." The picture showed 6-year-old Jennifer crouched in their old garden, gently holding a small bird with a broken wing. William remembered that day clearly. Jennifer had found the bird and insisted they nurse it back to health. For 2 weeks, she'd fed it with an eyedropper and talked to it every day. "What happened to the bird?" Lucy asks, studying the photo. "It got better and flew away," William said. "Jennifer cried when it left, but she was happy it was healthy again. She said that was more important than keeping it." Lucy traced her finger along the edge of the photograph. "She looks happy. She was happy," William said. "Your grandma and I, we made sure of that. We did everything we could to give her a good life." "Tell me about Grandma," Lucy said softly. William pulled out another photo, this one showing his wife holding baby Jennifer. His wife had been beautiful, with the same green eyes that Lucy had inherited. Looking at the picture still hurt, but it was a different kind of hurt now, less sharp, more like a gentle ache. "Her name was Rebecca," William said. "She was the kindest person you could ever meet. She would have loved you so much, Lucy. Do you think she knows about me, wherever she is now?" William considered the question seriously. "I think she does. I think she's the one who brought us together." Over the following weeks, William began sharing more memories with Lucy. He told her about Jennifer's first day of school, how excited she'd been to wear her new backpack. He described the way Jennifer used to help him in his workshop, always wanting to learn how to use the tools even though she was too young. "That's where you got your talent for carving," William realized one evening as he watched Lucy work on a small wooden flower. Her technique was improving quickly, and she had a natural feel for the wood that reminded him strongly of Jennifer. "Did Mama like to carve too?" "She loved watching me work," William said. "She was always asking questions about why I made certain cuts or how I knew which direction the grain was going. I was planning to teach her properly when she got older." Lucy looked up from her carving. "Maybe she taught me somehow." "Through the teddy bear." William smiled at that idea. It was a beautiful thought, that Jennifer had somehow passed her love of woodworking to her daughter through the carved button on the old bear dot. As winter settled in around the mountain, William began making changes to the cabin. Lucy needed more space, more comfort than his sparse living arrangement could provide. He started building a small addition to the back of the cabin, a proper bedroom for Lucy with a real window and enough space for her few belongings. "You don't have to do all this work for me," Lucy said one afternoon as she helped him measure boards for the new room. "Yes, I do," William said firmly. "You're my granddaughter. You deserve to have a real home, not just a place to sleep." Lucy was quiet for a moment. "This already feels like home," she said. William stopped working and looked at her. "Really?" "With Great Aunt Dorothy, I always felt like I was visiting," Lucy explained. "Like I was borrowing someone else's life. But here, with you, it feels like I belong." Those words hit William harder than he'd expected. He'd been so focused on giving Lucy what she needed that he hadn't realized how much she was giving him in return. For 5 years, he'd been existing rather than living. Now every day had purpose again. They started new traditions together. Every evening after dinner, they'd sit by the fire and work on their carving projects. William would tell Lucy stories about her mother and grandmother while their hands stayed busy with the wood. Sometimes Lucy would ask questions, and sometimes she'd just listen. One particularly cold night, Lucy looked up from the wooden rabbit she was carving and said, "Grandpa William, do you think Mama knows I found you?" William set down his tools and considered the question. "I think she does. I think maybe she guided you to that auction somehow. I was scared that day," Lucy admitted. "I didn't know what was going to happen to me. But when I saw you raise your hand, something inside me felt safe." "I felt something too," William said. "I didn't understand it then, but there was something about you that made me think of family," Lucy smiled. "We found each other. We did." William started taking better care of himself too. He trimmed his beard and began washing his clothes more regularly. He wanted to be worthy of Lucy's love, to be the grandfather she deserved. When he looked in the mirror now, he saw a man with purpose again instead of just a broken hermit. They made a small memorial for Jennifer and Rebecca in the clearing behind the cabin. William carved a beautiful wooden marker with both their names, and Lucy picked wildflowers to plant around it. It wasn't a sad place, it was a place to remember and to feel connected to the family members they both missed. "Do you think they're together?" Lucy asked as they knelt by the memorial one evening. "I hope so," William said. "I think they're watching over us." Lucy leaned against his shoulder. "I'm glad I have you, Grandpa William. I'm glad I have you too, sweetheart." As Christmas approached, William realized he hadn't celebrated a holiday in 5 years. But now he had Lucy, and she deserved to have Christmas morning like any other child. He started planning in secret, thinking about what gifts he could make for her and how they could celebrate together. For the first time since the accident, William was looking forward to something. He was planning for the future again, thinking about birthdays and holidays and all the memories they would make together. Lucy had brought more than just her presence into his life. She'd brought hope. She'd brought the possibility of happiness. Again, she'd reminded him what it felt like to love someone and be loved in return. Most importantly, she'd given him back his sense of family. They were both still healing from their losses, but they were healing together. And William was beginning to understand that sometimes the family you end up with is even more precious because of everything you went through to find each other. Every night as he listened to Lucy's peaceful breathing from her bed, William felt grateful for the mysterious circumstances that had brought them together, grateful for second chances, grateful for the discovery that love doesn't end, it just finds new ways to grow. 6 months had passed since that life-changing day at the auction, and the mountain cabin had transformed into something William never thought he'd have again, a real home. The small addition he'd built for Lucy was complete, painted a soft yellow that reminded him of sunshine. She'd helped him choose the color, saying it made her feel happy every time she looked at it. Spring was arriving early this year, and the forest around their cabin was coming alive with new growth. William stood on the porch with his morning coffee, watching Lucy feed the family of deer that had become regular visitors. She'd named them all Patch, Mama Doe, and the little fawn she called Buttercup. The deer weren't afraid of her anymore. They'd learned that the quiet girl with gentle hands always brought them the best apple pieces. "Grandpa William?" Lucy called softly, not wanting to startle the deer. "Buttercup's getting so big." "She sure is," William replied, walking over to join her. "Pretty soon she won't need her mama as much." Lucy looked up at him with a small smile. "Kind of like me, except I'll always need you." Those words hit William right in the heart, like they always did. 6 months ago, he'd been a broken man who could barely take care of himself. Now he woke up every day with purpose, with someone depending on him, with love filling the empty spaces in his chest. The changes hadn't been just in Lucy's life, they'd been in his too. William had started going to town more often, and people were beginning to see him differently. No longer the crazy hermit from the mountain, he was now the man who'd given a home to an orphan child. Mrs. Morrison at the general store always asked about Lucy now, and other townspeople would nod and smile when they saw him. "How's that granddaughter of yours doing?" The mailman had asked just last week when he'd made the long drive up to deliver some official papers about Lucy's guardianship. Granddaughter. William loved hearing people say that word. It made their relationship real in a way that went beyond just the two of them knowing the truth. Lucy had enrolled in the local school after Christmas, though she came home every afternoon to spend time with William in the mountains. Her teacher, Miss Patterson, had called to say that Lucy was doing wonderfully, bright, kind to other children, and especially talented in art class. She draws the most beautiful pictures of forest animals, Miss Patterson had told William during their last conference. And she's been teaching some of the other children about woodworking. You're clearly having a wonderful influence on her. William had swelled with pride at those words. He was having an influence on Lucy, but she was changing him just as much. Maybe more. On this particular spring morning, William had a surprise planned. He'd been working on something special for weeks, carving in secret whenever Lucy was at school or busy with other things. Today felt like the perfect day to give it. To her, Lucy, he said as they walked back toward the cabin, I have something for you. Her eyes lit up with curiosity. What is it? Close your eyes and hold out your hands. Lucy squeezed her eyes shut and cupped her palms together. William carefully placed his gift in her hands, a wooden jewelry box he'd spent hours carving. The lid was decorated with intricate flowers and leaves, and inside he'd carved small compartments lined with soft fabric. Okay, you can look, Lucy opened her eyes and gasped. The box was beautiful, clearly made with tremendous care and love. She ran her fingers over the carved details, amazed by the smooth finish and perfect proportions. Grandpa William, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, she whispered. Open it, William said softly. Lucy lifted the lid, and a gentle melody began to play, a music box mechanism that William had ordered special from town. But that wasn't the real surprise. Inside the box, nestled in the largest compartment, was a small wooden figure of a girl holding a teddy bear. It's me, Lucy breathed, picking up the tiny carving. It's you? William confirmed. So you'll always remember this time in our lives when we found each other? Lucy looked at the figure more closely and noticed something else. The tiny teddy bear in the wooden girl's arms had a microscopic button carved on its chest, just like her real bear. Grandpa William, she said, tears starting to form in her eyes, how did you make it so perfect? Because I pay attention, William said, kneeling down to her level. I notice everything about you, sweetheart. The way you hold your bear when you're thinking, the way you tilt your head when you're listening to a story, the way you smile when you're really happy. Lucy threw her arms around his neck, clutching the music box carefully between them. I love you, Grandpa William. I love you too, Lucy, more than all the stars in the sky. As they hugged, William thought about how much had changed since that strange day at the auction. He'd started selling his carvings in town again, and people were buying them faster than he could make them. Word had spread about the quality of his work, and he'd even gotten orders from people in neighboring towns. The extra income meant he could provide better for Lucy new clothes, school supplies, little treats that made her smile. But more importantly, it meant he was part of the community again. He was contributing something positive instead of just hiding away from the world. Grandpa William, Lucy said as they sat together on the porch steps, do you think we're the luckiest family in the world? William considered that question seriously. 6 months ago, they'd both been alone and hurting. Lucy had lost the only family she'd known, and William had been slowly disappearing into his grief. By any measure, they should have been unlucky people, but somehow, through a series of events that seemed impossible when he thought about them, they'd found each other. A broken man and a lonely child had become a family, not through blood alone, but through choice and love and the daily decision to take care of each other. I think we might be, William said finally. Not because nothing bad ever happened to us, but because we found our way to each other despite everything, Lucy nodded thoughtfully. Miss Patterson says that families come in all different shapes. She says the most important thing is that people love each other and take care of each other. Miss Patterson is a smart woman. As evening approached, they sat together by the fire like they did every night. Lucy worked on a new carving project, a small bird that was turning out better than anything she'd made before. William watched. Her hands moved confidently with the knife, seeing so much of Jennifer in her movements. Grandpa William, Lucy said without looking up from her work. Do you think Mama knows we're okay now? William looked at the photograph of Jennifer and Rebecca, that now sat on the mantel, no longer hidden away, but part of their daily life. I think she knows, sweetheart. I think she's happy that we have each other. Lucy smiled and continued carving. I think so too. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate. The sounds that had once emphasized William's loneliness now felt like a lullaby, the peaceful soundtrack to a life that was full again. As Lucy yawned and prepared for bed, William realized that he'd stopped counting the days and started planning. For years. He thought about teaching Lucy to drive when she was older, about helping her with school projects, about watching her grow into the amazing woman she was destined to become. Good night, Grandpa William, Lucy said, giving him their nightly hug. Good night, sunshine, William replied, using the nickname that had come naturally to him. Sweet dreams. As Lucy settled into her bed in the sunny yellow room, William sat by the dying fire and felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years. Complete contentment. They were family now in every way that mattered, and tomorrow would bring new adventures, new memories, and new reasons to be grateful for the mysterious ways that love finds its way home.